it's also pretty remarkable that you've got in this moment conservatives sort of abandoning principles they've had for a long time in service of this very polarized COVID agenda. I mean, it's hard to imagine the last time that conservatives really wanted to override local control, to override the decisions of private schools and private businesses. But here we are, where Republican governors have abandoned long-term principles in order to speak to this sort of growing culture war over COVID. But regardless of what anybody thinks, there's no way that having a culture war over this pandemic is helping anybody. It's not helping any of us stay safe. It's not helping any of us get back to work, get back to school, or get anything done. It's madness.
What do you think, in your opinion, what do you think are the factors or the rationale that are making this political decision, or are making this political decision, for better or for worse?
I mean, for better or worse, I mean, I think you've got a big professional operation on social media that's been putting out a lot of disinformation. I think you've got some media personalities and networks that have really invested in the anti-public health narratives going on. And I think it's created a counter reaction where no one can actually just have a sensible conversation about how we get people to school and try to keep people out of the hospital, which is basically what people ought to be able to count on government to do that right now. And you know, this is a time when you want politicians to act like grown-ups and solve grown-up problems instead of throwing more gasoline onto the fires of culture wars. And that's what I think is wrong with what Governor Lee and Governor DeSantis have done recently, is they've just thrown gasoline onto culture war fires.
Is there anything specific that will help people figure out, specific to the governor and to the climate here in Tennessee? Do you think there's anything specific leading to these culture wars, as you're saying, or in the disinformation?
Well, I mean, look, I mean, I think it's a problem that's happening everywhere, and it's just a matter of whether you're going to have the leaders who are going to stand up to it and call out untruth when it happens. I mean, there's things that are true and there's things that are false. And if people will be less concerned with protecting someone's right to believe something that's false and more concerned with just making sure that kids can go to school and stay safe, we'd be a lot further down the road.
How do you think the decision by the executive order yesterday is going to wind up impacting us? Where do you see this going? Not just necessarily from a political standpoint, but from
look, I mean, I don't know. I think that lots of schools are trying to figure out if that order is legal, if it applies to them, and how. I think that the short-term and medium-term ramifications are that the governor created a little bit of a mess. And he didn't just create it for himself, but he created it for 153 school districts and thousands of principals and teachers across the state who are going to be picking up this mess for a little bit. This could end up in court where we're trying to figure out whether this is actually within the governor's emergency powers. But it's a weird thing to hear the governor invoke his emergency powers to weaken the emergency response. I don't think those emergency powers of Tennessee have ever been used in that way. I mean, you wouldn't imagine that someone like the governor invoking his emergency powers to say that people can stay home when there's an evacuation order for a hurricane. Like, that's not what the emergency powers are for. And so it's just kind of a ludicrous situation that we find ourselves in, and we've kind of shot ourselves in the foot when schools were, I think, trying to get a handle on getting this year going without the drama that they dealt with last year.
How about the financial impacts? Like you're saying, there may or may not be some legal challenges that come as a result of this. Ultimately, it's a taxpayer who winds up footing the bill for a lot of these the disagreements or infighting.
Well, I mean, I think the cost of the conflict is minimal compared to the two big costs that will come from this. One is the cost of just prolonging this epidemic and the absence of consistent standard public health messaging is keeping this pandemic worse in Tennessee than it is in the rest of the country and in most of the world. Like, we have more cases per capita, more hospitalizations than most places, and that's a self-inflicted wound. And we are going to be paying the price that way. The second price is going to be in the schools that are dealing with absences and quarantines and those kinds of messes, because the governor has taken away a powerful tool to deal with those. I mean, I think a lot of us as parents, as lawmakers, want kids to be in person in school, but you can't just say, kids, you have to go to school, and then not give the schools the tools that they need to actually keep people safe.
Is there any kind of lasting impacts? I mean, obviously the pandemic's created a lot of, we're seeing things that we've never seen as a society or as a government.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that the scariest long-term impact is whether or not we're capable of solving problems together as rational adults right now. And if you saw the footage from the Williamson County School Board the other night, you might question whether we're actually capable of acting like adults right now. And that's the biggest problem for me about what the governor did, is he took the side of the people who were out there threatening doctors and validated that point and threw fuel into that exact fight at a time when we needed a statewide leader who would lower the volume, who would try to lower the conflict and try to work towards a solution that would work for everybody.
Let me flip that on you really quick. So, because one of the things you said, that can be made, I guess the argument can be made is that's a fear, is the lasting impact of if you start giving schools the rights to mandate certain things in a health emergency, could that potentially lead to further loss of rights, parental rights or anything? Because you hear that a lot, and so that's kind of the thing, is one step, yes, it's a under the guise of a health emergency, but could that lead to lasting impacts to where parents or students lose any types of rights or freedom?
No. I mean, I think that this argument that there is some sort of unprecedented attack on freedom is kind of ridiculous. Schools have been telling people how long and short their skirts should be and like what's on their t-shirts for years, and people haven't gone like up into arms about whether schools are acting out beyond their place. I mean, this is plainly within the scope of what schools are supposed to do. If something dangerous happens while your kids are at school, you expect the school to actually be responsible and deal with it. And that's what they're doing. And so, I mean, they're locally elected, they're accountable to their local residents who will have the chance to vote them out of office if they've gone too far in enacting public health precautions. But if they haven't, like, they'll be reelected. And that's the way that local government has worked for 200 years. And we don't need the governor to selectively choose when to come in and come out of that, and when to weigh in and preempt and sort of big dog local government decisions.
How would either you personally or the party as a whole in the state, what do you think, what would you guys have been doing differently? And what would you do differently if it was, you sitting in his chair, for instance?
Well, I mean, I think that we've all suffered because there hasn't been a clear attempt to work across party and ideological and geographic lines, right? Like, we should be including doctors. We should be including Republicans, Democrats, people from rural areas, people from urban areas, and trying to figure out how to make this make sense, as opposed to how to listen best to the Fox News, MSNBC, right wing, left wing, kind of what's the right response for the parties. We count on the people who are actually elected to come together and make decisions that will actually work for everybody. And like, that's what we need. And that's what's been missing in Tennessee.
And do you think there's going to be a solution? How do you think this all ends? Not that there isn't necessarily an end in sight. How do you think this is going to all wind up?
Well, I mean, I think that the worst part about the decisions that have been made is that they're pushing the end of this even further out. And so I think it's harder to know what that's going to be. But look, I mean, I think that we're going to have to get back to some common sense grown-up thinking at some point. And but we're just not there right now. Like, we're in a moment where we're just a little captured by sort of conspiracy theory and ideological politics that just don't have that much to do with reality.